Welcome to Professor Game Podcast, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who brings the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting the students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I teach and work at IE Business School in Madrid, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials. Want to know more? Go to professorgame.com/subscribe, start on our email list, and ask me anything. Engagers, welcome again, because today we have somebody I met actually in Lisbon. You might have heard before of this conference that we went to. It's the Business Learning Games Conference and Competition from the Business Excellence Institute. I mentioned this quite a few times before I went there. If you saw my social media, there was quite a bit of spam in that sense, a lot of images, videos, and so on. But today we are with one of the presenters there, also a panelist from the panel that we did there, which is Lars. But Lars, before we introduce you, we want to know, are you prepared to engage?
Oh, yes. Happy to engage, Rob. Great to be here.
Let's do this, because Lars Hoffmann is the Learning Director of DHI, a global water engineering consultancy and software provider. He has used, designed, and sold learning games for more than 20 years, working both as within and as a consultant in leadership development and change for large international organizations. He has a background in psychology and prefers very much board games to computer games, even though DHI is digitalizing heavily. And he also is on the delivery of training for its clients, the digitalization, I guess. So Lars, is there anything that we're missing that should be interesting from that intro?
Oh, well, perhaps just to say that we have a large training department for delivering training for our clients in our software and in using our solutions. And then I'm also responsible for all our internal training as well. So it's kind of a double function, both within and without the organization. Yeah.
That's great. That's a lot of learning on you.
Certainly, yeah. Luckily, I have very proficient colleagues.
That's great. So Lars, tell us, what does it look like to be in your shoes in a day like today, like last week? I don't know. We want to get the feel of what being Lars in as the Learning Director of DHI looks like.
Yeah, well, I guess my work is, as many managers in an HR department or a sales organization, it's taken up with a lot of internal meetings, a lot of them online meetings, since we're a global organization. So those would be video conferences. And I also do quite a lot of facilitation of knowledge sharing, because to us learning is not only about doing courses or being in a training situation, but also knowledge sharing, and that needs facilitation. And I do that mainly at present for our sales organization. Then I must confess, this doesn't become very glorious, but you spend a lot of time checking email, answering people. But on a good day, I get time to do actual learning design, of some kind of training delivery or similar. And then I have a lot of interactions with the staff I have at my own location. So that would be the day at work. Outside of that, so if we kind of get the whole person, I love listening to audiobooks when driving to and from work. I usually get time to actually play a board game with my family or friends. I have loads of board games, so just to try to keep up pace with development in that world is a full-time job. And then I love some sports and reading. So that would be the typical day.
Fantastic. And if you like audiobooks, I'm sure you will also enjoy a habit like podcasting if you haven't already. So
exactly. I want you. You're probably gonna get me hooked there. Exactly.
If you do any commuting, it's a nice. There's 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 1 hour, 2 hour of these things, and there's a whole range of things that you can listen to. Exactly.
Yeah. I need to explore that more. But now in present, I found a wonderful speaker from in ancient history, which I'm listening to now, Kenneth Hall. I can really recommend him. Anything from the ancient world, he's just an amazing lecturer.
Fantastic. So Lars, we want to make our first strong statement here, and it's about a time when you faced a fail or a first attempt at learning. You were creating this learning experience, especially if you were using some sort of gaming strategy or board gaming strategy, as you as it seems you prefer as well, in which you set out to do something, and it didn't go out as expected. And we want to like be there with you. We want to learn with you, whatever it was that you learned from that experience, or how you came out of it stronger. What would you do different? Like, take us to that situation. We want to be there with you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I have lots to go on there, and I didn't want to go,
Your favorite one.
Yeah, exactly. So I didn't want to go too back far in time on a question like this. So the one that comes to mind within the last couple of years was when I was going to help a large, the biggest Scandinavian insurance company with creating more understanding of their strategy in the whole organization, a better grasp of what is the strategy about, and in order to promote its execution. And I, together with the strategy department, I designed a really cool board game that where when you played it, you played through the strategy. So you played through how they intend to change their business model into another business model. And it was a really cool concept, and we put lots of effort into it. A lot of the all the knowledge that the strategy department had on how is the future looking, where do we want to go, but still we are not completely, we don't have it's not like they had a plan how to execute. They knew they were moving into this new space of a different business model. And so we created this really cool game where you could play into that space and explore all kinds of actions, implementing one thing before the other, and there were these. So you could play these cards that changed the organization a little bit, changed the business model a little bit, and the market would react. And we also had random event cards coming up with things that they estimated might happen in the future, but they didn't know. So, for example, Google entering the insurance market, or all kinds of things. So it was a game lover's dream in some ways, and we had fantastic results with people that we played it with. They really loved the depth and the discussions coming up, and the deeper understanding of the strategy. So far, very nice, so good experience. Yeah, exactly. But then we had that kind of meeting the real world of how was this game going to be used, because the fact was, when I was facilitating the game, and one or two of the consultants in the strategy department who really understood all the complexity and depth and we put into it, when they were facilitating the game, it worked very well. It was a long game. It required a 3-4 hour afternoon in order to really make sense. But then, reality struck, and one of those guys left the organization, another one got promoted to something more important, and I was working externally, so I couldn't help them. And then they decided to put the responsibility for the game to HR instead of the strategy department, which was heavily loaded with important work. And the HR department, they were willing, but they couldn't learn the game. They couldn't learn to facilitate it, even though I spent quite some time trying to teach them how to facilitate this game, because there was just too much knowledge in it, and so it ended up that they almost didn't use it, right? And we spent a lot of resources, and so it was just like we had this gem lying around, and the top people in the organization, when they played it, they thought, "Oh, this is amazing! All the complexity, all the different perspectives, all the different, if we do this and the market reacts like that, then we might have that problem." And I could just go on and on with all the nice gaming features in that learning game. But the practicalities of using it, getting both the trainers to get on board, to have the confidence to go with it, and because it was so close, the problem was also perhaps that the game was too close to reality, so that it was hard for the facilitators to feel confident that they mastered all the knowledge within the game, because there was so much thought to everything, right? And they felt they needed to be experts, and so. It was it almost wasn't played, right? So it's just
that's
sad
painful,
story.
Right? When you put so much effort.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just, looking back, I thought I should have seen some of this coming, because I have, in my 20 years, working as selling board games, working as an external consultant. I was with Henley Business School when I did this project, but but I've been in the shoes of the external consultant, loving your game and all that it can do and all the potential here. And you meet an internal client who sees this as something they also have seen the light, what can a good game do? And then I didn't think enough in terms of, implementation, securing that ownership, the transfer of knowledge from the design group to the actual facilitators, the amount of effort required to gather a whole team and really use the game properly. And yeah.
So what would you do like imagine that you get a very similar project that is, involving heavily, maybe not strategy, but maybe, I don't know, operations or any other.
Exactly.
How would you approach it differently to make it a success nowadays?
Yeah, I would definitely, try to apply some of these, what many people talk about, agile methods, where you very early expose your prototype to feedback from the actual end user. So doing something, making a quick prototype and then saying, okay, we give this prototype to one of those you imagine will be the facilitators and send them out with a real team and observe what is happening, what kind of feedback do they get. I would spend much more time on getting a sense of what are people who are going to use this saying is really interesting and what is less interesting, because I very often, you find out that you have assumptions, deep-seated assumptions about what do these people out there really need, and very often you're surprised they need something somewhat different, right? And you very often find out at the end of your project instead of at the beginning. So it's the stuff like the lean startup, the agile methods, the developing a minimal viable product, those kind of concepts that some might be familiar with, they're developed for exactly that problem.
So what you would probably change is, prototyping early and doing iterations on top of that.
Yeah, it does. And it wasn't like I hadn't heard of these things those years ago, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes you're just, I don't know.
It has to hit you in the head.
Yeah, it does. You asked for a big failure, and I certainly had felt it there, right?
Very interesting, and lots to learn from. I think it's a good experience that we can. It's true that sometimes it has to hit you in the head, but it's also true that sometimes you get like this aha moment and say, well, yeah, this is something that I have to do anyway, so let's go ahead and do it. And flipping that on its head, Lars, what would you say is actually a challenge that you faced? Something that you would consider was a very interesting challenge, a very, a powerful challenge that you faced, and of course solved using these, maybe a board game, one of these game strategies. Tell us, guide us through what you did there, and what would you maybe attribute that success to?
Well, you're coming from the other experience. What was perhaps a main factor in making you think in a kind of top-down manner and not going out getting feedback from the users in the beginning is that you have this, we at the top management, we have the strategy, we have this, we want to communicate it, we want people to follow this strategy, right? So it puts you in a mind of we know best or something like that, right? And I had another challenge that I'm kind of proud of, where the challenge was a bit the same, that we this bank, national bank, wanted more execution of the strategy, and sure, they had a lot of ideas and opinions about what is needed more. But what we did in that situation was that we thought less in terms of we need to put a lot of stuff into people's heads, and instead thought we need to facilitate a really good dialogue or process locally, where people are nudged or gently nudged through a game or through play to deal with difficult challenges with regards to the strategy, but they know best what is challenging them. And that was perhaps because in this case with this bank, it was they were a bit further on their strategic journey. So with the insurance company, they were a bit early. They had lots to say, not much experience yet. Here they were a bit further and could tell me when I probed in, yeah, we've told a lot about the strategy and people have heard all of this, but still we need action. We need people to start doing all that stuff that's difficult. We don't believe it'll help us to communicate more. We need to do some kind of help us with getting them moving. And what we came up with was to develop a board game, and we tested it reasonably early with some teams similar to what we were going to do, where this game was something they could use by themselves. So what we actually did was we sent a box to each team in the organization to play at the same time across the whole country. So just after the bank closed on that Tuesday, they played the game locally in every department, every bank. And that game was really simple, right? So it's almost like the opposite of the other one. The other one had so much built into it and all this amazing you could explore. This was a very simple, more similar to a party game, but it was related to the strategy, and it made them, pack this box up and have fun. They read the rules aloud, and the game kind of guided them through a dialogue and an exploration of what they thought locally were their biggest challenges with moving on the strategy while keeping the operations floating, right? So mostly people are busy with daily operations, and they know they have to act on this, developing the business or doing new things, but it drowns in daily operations. So a good conversation, and it was fun and engaging through the game and some points and some, different of these mechanics. But it was mainly, they felt it was about themselves and that it was fun, and it ended up in a meaningful place, where they decided on some things that they could do that were a bit challenging, but that there were an agreement upon this would help them move on the strategy and make a difference for the customers or for those they were helping in the organization.
Well, a lot of empowerment, like personal empowerment
exactly.
for employees. That sounds, I would say that's one of the keys, right?
Yeah, it really is. And I mean, this game came as a box from top management, right? It was from the CEO made a short video. We're going to play this game. And so there was a lot of, okay, we think this is meaningful. We think this is serious. But we also, the communication below the words were, we have a lot of faith in you, that you know what to do, right? And I think that's also a reason this was a success, that they felt, okay, this is our game. This is actually quite fun, but it's meaningful also. And hey, now we're actually talking about something that we have all felt or similar. So, the empowerment effect can be really strong when people feel that there's somebody who has trust in you, and it helps us across some barrier that we don't get over in the daily life, and we get involved, and suddenly we are talking about something that's really meaningful. And I think also that what helped here was that the manager, who usually has the role that he or she has to be, leading and pushing and pulling and getting people to do stuff, and he or she could step back and join this process, and everybody was involved in a kind of the best way. I don't want to get into the depth of how the game was working, but it felt perhaps a bit like a brainstorming process and a challenging each other process that was moderated by the game on getting you to move and on the strategy, right?
Fantastic. So, I mean, if there's any link that you can share after the end that we can put in the show notes, great. If not, we perfectly understand. Sure. And we've been talking about two separate projects that you mentioned, that they're somehow related. But when you're presented with these challenges, is there some sort of, and you're maybe going to create a board game or similar, how do you structure your thoughts around it? Do you have some sort of process? Do you follow some other person's process? How do you do it? How do you structure your thoughts around this?
Yeah, good point. Well, my main background as a psychologist and working with leadership development and management teams, and so is to facilitate dialogues, to facilitate talking about difficult issues, and so I mainly think in terms of what kind of mental and dialogue process do I want to guide? Do I think people need? So I try to explore where do we want people to put their attention? What kind of things that we know they might be avoiding do we want to get them to face? And we know that we have this term in psychology called avoidance learning or avoidance behavior, that we very quickly learn if something is uncomfortable, we learn to avoid it. And we actually get so good at it that it's unconscious. So we just avoid it without even thinking about it. So we sometimes don't know we are avoiding stuff, right? But we know as process consultants and management consultants that stuff that people are avoiding. And that's why we need leadership for a lot of things. But a game like this, or a good consultant, can guide you through these things. So I think very much in those terms. So for example, if you need to learn a new skill or you need to solve some kind of local problem, I, as the facilitator, I think, okay, which steps do I need to guide through people people through. And I also know I am not the expert, so I have to guide them so that they are the experts on their challenge. So have to guide them through to find that themselves.
So
And
it's
that
sort
might
of
be
facilitator kind of role, what you're always looking into.
Exactly. And then I have this game background as well, since I designed my own games and played lots of games since I was 10 years old. So when I know I can't be present, or I can't have a good facilitator or a consultant present, then I often think in a game-like manner that the game can do some of the support that the facilitator could have done. But now we can't send a good moderator in every situation. So how can the game help? And the game mechanics are usually good at directing people's attention to some things. Through the rules and the rewards mechanisms you build in, you can get people you kind of build in where the gems and the nuggets are hidden in the game. And so I try to make the game reward the behavior that I'm looking for. So if I want people to be better at challenging their assumptions, or challenge the top management, or be more critical, or be more appreciative of each other, then I try to build in mechanisms in the game that rewards this kind of behavior, and but do it in a manner so that they can still keep their autonomy and explore the game. But I try to build it so that the game nudges them through this process that I want them to take.
Fantastic.
And that requires a lot of insight, both in games and in how to facilitate dialogues, and a good deal of knowledge about how does work actually go on in organizations. So I think of those as some of my key strengths, and it's also something that has made me come back to working inside an organization like I do at present with DHI, to find out, okay, how do we get organizations to really act and execute and solve huge problems, 1,000 people together. And that inspires me a lot in order to understand how to create these kind of tools. And of course, I perhaps failed to mention that the game should always also end with some kind of debriefing or summarizing and decision making, so that it doesn't only just become a fun experience or good conversations, but it becomes something where, okay, we found out this, we're going to keep each other committed to this because this is difficult or similar. Yeah.
That sounds fantastic. Just a quick break before we continue. Are you enjoying this podcast? If you're listening through a podcasting app, please subscribe and rate us on the app. This will be of great help to reach more engagers so we can change the world together through gamification. So Lars, what would you say is something that perhaps, I don't know if every single project, but in general, that you would say, if you use this strategy, this best practice, we could call it, maybe any learning through board games, almost any project could benefit from. What would you say is there an element, a key, something that you would say is sort of not a golden bullet or anything, but something that would always perhaps help and facilitate get these things through?
Yeah, good question. I mean, we covered some of them, right? Get expose your ideas early to the users, right? Get some feedback from them.
That's a best practice for sure.
Yeah, exactly. But so I need to mention that. That's the one for myself, right? I'm prone to not going that way, but I try to remember.
But that's very human. I mean, we do have our egos, and we think that we have it figured out, and then we smash ourselves against something, and that's when we realize, maybe I wasn't so right.
Yeah, exactly. And I kill your darlings. That's certainly something I need to learn also, right? But I would say that, having seen a lot of games, also we attended this conference where we saw a lot of games, amazing games from all over the world. So this is really catching on, and it's incredible to see. It was not like that when I started 20 years ago. But I would say, coming from the business world, from the inside, the HR departments, or working in management of HR, I would say go for the simple. Seek simple solutions. Think like Lego bricks. So instead of building a huge spaceship, make some Lego bricks that we all can use, right? So I think that a game that takes a whole day to play, it's really difficult to use. It's very often very difficult for others to use. So make some components that we can others can combine. Like the way the software world is working right now globally, it's everybody's making small pieces of code that others can use, and it's just amazing the pace you then get of everybody designing and contributing to that. So the learning world, learning games could move in that direction, with simple pieces that others can assemble. That would be a great direction.
It makes a lot of sense. And we also had a Lego workshop there, which was very, very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, so again, you think yourself are the really wise man, but it's amazing the potential out there for people themselves to build and construct and solve and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So, Lars, after listening to all these questions, or many of these questions, is there somebody that comes to your mind, as well as like thinking, well, I would like to listen to the answers of this or that person? Is there such a person that comes to your mind that you would like to listen to in an interview like this one in Professor Game?
Yeah, on learning games, right? Well, yeah, there's one I would love to listen to, and that would be a learning game designer in a Scandinavian learning game company called Works, and his name is Morten Jæger. So he's also a Dane, actually, and he's a really talented learning game designer, doing some amazing games for large global organizations. And so that he would be, I'm thinking kind of selfish here. What would inspire me? He would go really into the game mechanics of learning game design.
That's exactly what we want. Somebody who would inspire you in particular. That's great.
Yeah.
But I will have to ask you to spell that out once we finish.
Yeah,
the
exactly. I'll do that. Certainly.
My Dane is not very fluent nowadays.
I accept that, certainly.
In that same sense of recommendations, is there any book that you would recommend an audience like this one, like The Engagers, to read?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, that's I'm for the game designer. There's just come out a huge encyclopedia of board game mechanics. It's quite expensive, and I forgot the author's title, but it's called Encyclopedia of Board Game Mechanics, and that's just a compilation of the 250 most well-known board game mechanics. Because we are talking about a board game mechanics is like roll a die and move, or get a selection of cards and play one. That's your action, and all these kind of mechanics that's kind of the Lego bricks you're using for games, and it's the same we're using for learning board games. And so that book is really, really nice. I've started reading it. But actually, if I can squeeze in another recommendation, it would be the best book I have read for many years on understanding strategy and action execution in organizations, which I think that any learning game designer needs to understand. So how do people get work done? That's what it's really about. And it's called The Art of Action by Stephen Bungay, a British historian and management expert. And it's an amazing book. And those who love board games will love that book, because it covers a lot of military history with great examples. And, many board games came out of military practice and history. So that's an amazing book on understanding action and planning and humans.
So we've had your perhaps favorite guests that you might like on the show. We've had perhaps two of your favorite books. But what would you say is your favorite game?
Yeah, I've had my favorite game across all time would probably be Dungeons and Dragons. The role-playing game classic from the 70s by Gary Gygax, and it's not like it's the best role. It's a remarkably flawed game, but that's perhaps the whole point, that it engaged a whole generation in becoming game designers, and me as well. So that would be for all time my favorite. Unfortunately, I haven't managed to play role-playing games for learning yet, but might one day. But at present, what I'm playing most and enjoying a lot is a game called 878 Vikings, which is a remarkably fun light game about the Viking invasions of Britain. So I can also recommend that.
Sounds like the Vikings series that is on History Channel.
Exactly, it'll go right in that game. Exactly. So it's very visual and good storytelling and fun to play.
Fantastic. And in that same sense, what would you say is your superpower when creating these board games for learning?
My superpower.
Yes.
My superpower. I think that
Your sweet spot, something that you would say, like, if I asked somebody else, what would they say is your, one of your strong things that you are capable of doing in this area?
I think it's my dialogue facilitation skills, because I have done a lot of that and gotten a lot of training in it. Most of I've designed perhaps 50 different learning games. Many of them have been on games that facilitate dialogue. So I think that would be my special power, right? And you can use that also when designing a simulation game, but it's mainly the dialogue, the real dialogue about ourselves and the real stuff we're dealing with. That would be, I think I'll pick that one.
Fantastic. And Lars, is there any final piece of advice you want to leave the engagers with before we take off?
A final piece, play. I would say don't get too fascinated with the digital games. I mean, it can do a lot, but stay tuned to the board games also, because that's where you can easily experiment yourself and be a learning game designer or user. And it's much more easy to adjust it to your own needs. So go ahead, ask your learners to design a game. It can really release a lot of creativity, and they know a lot about what's needed. So that would be perhaps my best advice.
That sounds fantastic. Have your learners also be part of the co-creation process. So Lars, before we go, please let us know where we can find you, perhaps on the internet, website, social media, whatever it is you want to plug in here.
Well, I think it's most easy. I'm not as active as I should be, but I sometimes post articles on LinkedIn, so that would be probably the best place to find me or follow me or connect. But LinkedIn is keeping a limit of 30,000 contacts, so I'm a bit struggling there with getting more. But that would be the place to go.
Fantastic. So. Yeah. Thank you very much. Oh, I also know you from the game that you presented at the Business Learning Games conference has a webpage, empatos.dk. Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, empatos.dk.
That sounds like a Greek word. So empatos.
Yeah, well, I made it up. I made something short on empathy that I hope anybody could spell. I'm not sure it's working, but something along those lines.
To me, it's like some sort of Greek word. That's what it sounds like. But it sounds like a very good name. It's a game on empathy, as Lars was commenting. So exactly. I'll have all of these things in the show notes. So if you go to professorgame.com, you type in the search bar, you type Lars, Lars, you'll definitely find this episode, the links to Lars's LinkedIn page, the Empatos webpage, and everything that we've been talking about as well. So I want to thank you very much, Lars, for being with us today, for spending or investing all of this time with the engagers and all that learning that will come from that. However, for now and for today, I have to say that it's game over.
Okay. Thank you so much, Robert. It was a pleasure.
Hey, engagers. Thank you for listening to Professor Game podcast, and I hope you really enjoyed this interview with Lars. And do you have any questions that you would like to ask future guests? All you have to do is go to professorgame.com/question and ask your question. If it is selected, it will come up in a future episode and you will get your answer live. And of course, before you go on to your next mission, would you like to know about the blockchain game? Then all you have to do is subscribe using your favorite podcast app and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there!